Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Thriving Together. I'm LaRonda Scott with Daymark Realty, and I have the honor and pleasure of having Ms. Isley Cotton with me this evening. Isley, thank you so much for agreeing to join me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
I will say the conversation this evening is not always the easiest of ones. But with it being Mental Health Awareness Month, and quite honestly, as I have had the honor and quite honestly the personal need to learn more, I was just drawn to the importance of having a conversation around mental health and especially suicide. And I shared earlier today, kind of like sharing with folks what the conversation was going to be like. I asked, did you know that Black youth, the suicide rate is the fastest growing compared to their peers of other races? And I said, did you know that? Because for me, I never knew that. And I believe Dr. Richardson has even shared that it's to the point of being an epidemic. So the conversation needed to be had. So
Great
before
that
we
you created this space for us to be able to do it this evening, too.
thank you for being in this space, but I do want to make sure people know who is Isley. So do you mind introducing yourself?
I don't mind. So, my name is Isley Cotton. I serve as Youth Suicide Prevention Coordinator with our Comprehensive Suicide Prevention Team with the Injury and Violence Prevention Branch of the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. That is a mouthful.
It is, but it's an important one, and you cover a pretty wide span, do you not?
I do. I do. So, I actually have the privilege of going in all 100 counties. But I say that just to give context to it, but truly I only go where I'm invited.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those things where you have the capacity, and the willingness to go in, but we know that this conversation is still so taboo.
It
We're
is.
working very hard to remove stigma, but it's difficult. And so, like I say, I have the privilege of going in 100 counties, but I only go where I'm invited.
Well, and I suppose going where you're invited, you know that they may not be ready, but they want to be ready. So they're
Yeah.
more open to the conversation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Have you seen improvements with the stigma, or have you been able, you and your colleagues, because it's a very strong community, have you been able to wrap your arms around why the stigma?
Well, traditionally, if we just go back several generations, we know even within Black culture, like suicide was not something that we talked about. We only thought that it was a white issue, that it did not cross into our culture. And we know that that isn't true. But one of the things, too, that a lot of people don't know is that suicide used to be criminalized.
Oh,
And
I
so,
did not.
yeah, and that's so weird to say. If a person survived a suicide attempt, they were criminalized for attempting to take their life. If a person died by suicide, they were not able to be buried in the same cemetery as someone who may have died by, natural causes. And so that's why, safe language and messaging matters. And we're always, trying to get people to just change the way that they think and talk about suicide. And instead of
Mhm,
saying things like commit suicide, which
mhm.
oftentimes does, make us think about committing a crime or committing a sin. We try to shift people away from that language and to use more neutral and non-judgmental language, like the person killed themselves or that they died by suicide.
Okay. Or do you say attempt instead of the commit? Or
So if there is a suicide attempt, we
mhm,
just say that it was a suicide attempt. Sometimes you'll hear people say that a person had a successful suicide.
mm,
Had to complete it. So you see how that hit at your
mhm.
soul? It hits your
Yeah,
soul differently when you hear it because there's nothing successful about a life being lost.
right,
And so
right.
we just, try to again encourage people to use that non-judgmental language and just say that a person, had a suicide attempt. equally important is to say, if you're thinking about the same language, if a person has an attempt, sometimes you hear people say they had a failed attempt. Now,
Well,
I
you
want
don't
you
want
to
to say
think about,
someone failed at it.
yes, when I hear people say it, it makes me cringe. And I think about, especially with our babies, and anybody that's under 47 is a baby to me because I'm 47. So just thinking about our youth, you know, think about a student who has struggled with identity or just struggled with, being in a home where there are issues with, social drivers of health, or, he's experienced or she's experienced or they've experienced, family discord or something like that. And they feel like they're the problem, they're the burden of
Mhm.
the family. And so just say, if you say to a child, oh, I see you failed your suicide attempt, to a kid who already may have some issues with self-esteem and self-worth and self-concept, that may sound to them like, oh, I can't even get that right.
Right.
And so, I don't say that to really, shame or belittle people that use that language. I mean, there's so many things that we've been saying for a long time that we've got to do better at now. And so I
Mhm.
just want to uplift the fact that, we've got to extend each other grace.
Mhm.
We have to think about how to use compassionate language in this conversation that we have.
Well, talk about making changes and really not really reframing, but thinking about this differently. There are
Mhm.
people that believe if we talk about it, then we're planting an idea in someone's head. Is that a myth?
That is absolutely a myth. I want to say that we're powerful people, but we're not that powerful. We cannot create intentionality with people. And I'm so glad that
Mhm.
you brought that up because that is what people think. One or two things is going to happen. Either the
Mhm.
person is going to tell you, yes, if you have created safety and if you have built rapport, they're going to
Mhm.
say, yes, I'm thinking about suicide. Or they're going to say, no, they're not thinking about suicide. One of the two is going to happen, but we cannot plant the thought in someone's head because we just don't have the power of planting intentionality in someone's mind.
Well, thank you for sharing that because it's one of those, it's almost like I hate to um I don't want it to sound like I'm minimizing it, but it's almost something that you hear parents say, well, we're not going to talk about sex or provide anything because then you're going to
Mm,
plant the idea. This is not my
yes,
concept. So we cannot plant the seed of intentionality in a person.
we cannot do it.
What are some of the other challenges that you experience in your work around suicide and getting us to a place to where we're thinking of ourselves as what do you call it, preventionists?
Hmm. So I would say maybe one of the greatest challenges is working on the stigma piece, providing the education, or like in my case, I do a lot of trainings around the state. And like I said, in some areas, easier to get into than others,
Mhm.
especially if there are higher rates of youth suicide in certain communities. But I think by and large, the most difficult thing about my job is having conversations about means safety. While I
Mhm.
love to have those conversations, I think it's difficult for people who, are on one side of, I guess, the political whatever, whatever, you know what I'm saying, in regards to whether or not they support gun control.
Gotcha.
And so
Mhm.
in that conversation, the point of it is that we're talking about how to keep these children safe and free from access to firearms and medications and anything that can be used, as a suicide method. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that in North Carolina, in 44% of homes in North Carolina that have a firearm, that firearm is stored unloaded or stored loaded and unlocked. And a lot of people don't know that. So you hear the questions all the time. Well, how are children gaining access to these firearms? Well, also on the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, it says that 30% of middle schoolers and high schools say they can access the firearm in their home within less than an hour without a caregiver knowing. And
Wow.
so just that, yeah. So like having those conversations sometimes is very difficult because,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, especially if you're going into a community where people, a rural community where, folks may be avid hunters or be a part of,
Mm-hmm.
you know, gun clubs and that type of thing, which is okay. I am whatever people want to do. I absolutely support the Second Amendment right. That is not what that conversation is about.
Right.
And I think sometimes when you come into those spaces and you're talking about safety, what people are hearing you say is that you want to control what I do. That's not what
Mhm.
you're saying, but
Right.
what they're hearing you. That's what they're perceiving from the conversation. Oh, you're trying to tell me what to do. I'm absolutely not trying to tell you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to uplift the fact that we've got to do better as a state about storing our firearms safely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or that I'm doing something wrong. Like
Oh,
you're telling me
absolutely.
it should be locked away, and you start thinking about, well, is mine locked away? Oh, I don't know how to raise my children. I'm doing something.
Right. And I think when you do this work, you have to not necessarily have thick skin, but you have to be open-minded because you have to see it both ways. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think again, when you come into, those conversations, you have to let them know up front, I am not here to tell you what to do in your household.
Right.
I'm absolutely not here to tell you that, but I am here to provide you with some data that shows
Mm-hmm.
if we do this, that, and the other, if we
Mm-hmm.
learn how to store, secure these firearms safely, then our children or their friends who may come and visit won't be able to gain access to that firearm quickly.
So you said, so if 44% are left, they're accessible and unlocked, then that's 44% that we can control, controlling the controllables, essentially.
Absolutely. Because one of the things that breaks my heart, I'm going to tell you this, is when I'm going into communities and I begin to look at data through the North Carolina Violent Death Reporting System, and I'm looking in specific counties and I'm looking for either suicide or homicide information because those are the things that guide those conversations, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the data and I can see that in whatever year I have queried that there was a firearm related death of a child that was age 1 to 5 or even 5, 10 to 14, whatever the age is. But those
Mm-hmm.
younger ages, when I see that, immediately I go and begin to research.
Yeah.
Because if I'm looking at that data there, it probably is a telltale indication that that baby or another baby or another person probably was able to gain access to that firearm when
Mm-hmm.
there was an accidental shooting. And every time I've done that, just researching and whatever, that's what it was. And that's heartbreaking.
It
to-
is.
And that's why we need to have these conversations. But again, like I said, when you're going into communities and you haven't established trust, they don't really know what you're coming in to do. So you've got to come in inquisitive and you have to come in with humility, because that's not your area. I can remember, I liken it to growing up and, living in a home with my mom. One
Mm-hmm.
thing she didn't do is get past that threshold if she didn't think that you were a safe person. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh no, you
Yeah.
ain't gonna with that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were in the home and we did something, we ain't standing there with it. You got to get out. So I think that that's how communities are. And they should be protected because we know that in certain communities, we know there's been so much mistrust and so many other things, especially our marginalized communities over the years. And so
Yeah.
for me, you just have to be careful going in. And just because you have titles and you
Right.
work for agencies, and again, sometimes these same agencies have created so much mistrust for people that when you come in with this badge of honor, you think it's a badge of honor. And to them,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, you're not safe because you've hurt our people.
Yeah.
We have to be careful.
Well, talking about the data, we've talked about in terms of one of the things we can do to prevent it on the gun side. But
Mhm.
earlier I was talking about just the fast pace in which our
Oh,
youth are committing suicide. I was trying my best, Isley, to look for one of the handouts and things that you provided, and I cannot find it.
It's
But do
okay.
you have any of those numbers top of mind, just to paint a picture for folks of where we are now when it comes to our youth?
So, okay. So there's some data that says from the years 2011 and 2020, the age group that had the highest rate of suicide for Black and brown people, or Black and African American people,
Mm-hmm.
25 to 34. But let me tell you something. There's also some data that supports Black youth that are ages 5 to 12 die by suicide at twice the rate of their white counterparts. So
Five
there's
to
25, five. Let me tell you, and let me thank you for allowing me to just be candid
mm-hmm.
and just share openly. Now, of course, there are some things that I can't share, but I just feel like I need to say this. One of the things that, and I think this is the most difficult. I said earlier that the most difficult thing was, having conversations about, say, firearm stores. That is not the most difficult. The most difficult thing for me is to hear that a young person has died by suicide. I can tell you the burden that weighs on my heart when I hear that is one that I question often. Like, okay, Lord, like how long I got to do this? Because I don't know if my little heart can take it. Because I
Mm-hmm.
can tell you in the span of about 5 or 6 weeks that I'm familiar with, there have been about 4 or 5 suicides, and the youngest being age 9, and that's across the state and in different counties. And
Mm-hmm.
I just can't tell you. Yes, I can. That resonates, what
Mm-hmm.
that pain feels like. But I can also tell you that there are nights when I lose sleep. See, that's the part that people don't see. They just see you when they hear what you do, but they
Right.
don't know your connection to the work. And there are nights when I'm up and I can't sleep. And the Lord is saying, just like that mom has lost that baby last week and she's somewhere unable to sleep and crying, you're going to be up tonight and you're going to be praying for that mom. You're
Right.
going to do, this, that, and that. And so I think for me, that's the hardest thing. One of the questions we always ask is why?
Yes, we do.
Why did this happen?
And what did I miss?
What did I miss? We often ask those questions, and I totally get it. I totally get it. And that's why I think it's important that we take suicide prevention training and, mental health first aid training so that we can learn how to increase our noticing skills. Because sometimes you'll hear people say, well, such and such died by suicide, but there were no signs. And I'm quick to say, I remember when I was thinking about suicide in 2021,
Mm-hmm.
when my best friend died in her sleep. Nobody knew that I was suicidal. Nobody knew. And there was a behavioral change that no one picked up on. And I remember going to work because we actually worked at the same place. I remember going to work and I started wearing my hair up in head wraps. I don't know why. I liken it to blood memory. I liken it to when I went and visited Swaziland, Africa, back in 2007. And when we went into this particular homestead, there were some mothers from the village that were there mourning, and they had their hairs, they were wearing black and they had their hair wrapped. And I don't know why I made that connection. That's why I say it's got to be blood memory. It has to be
Yeah.
ancestral. It happens so instinctively, but no one picked up on it. But what they did say was, "Oh, Isley, I love your head wrap. Oh, I really love that head wrap." And I'm saying, wow, here I am suffering in silence. And nobody knew. And so when I share that with people, who worked with me at that place at that time, it's like, wow, like you would have left and we would not have known. We
Mm-mm.
would have said that there were no signs. And that was an obvious sign that we missed. And I think that's the way it is. But again, we still have to give ourselves grace because sometimes we just don't know what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
Training to increase our noticing skills and learn what those things. One of the trainings I do talks about exploring those things that look like or sound like they could be invitations to ask questions
Mm-hmm.
about suicide. That's why those trainings are so important.
Are there times also though to where, and I don't know what data says that it's truly impulse and there is no lead up to it? There's no signs.
So I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I want you to just think about this for just a second. There is research that supports that the time between a person having that initial thought and
Mm-hmm.
acting on that initial thought can be less than 5 minutes,
Oh,
if you can believe that or not. Because a lot of times people think, oh, well, people have just sat around for months, they've been miserable, and they had a plan. Not everyone has a plan. Sometimes it is just as immediate as that. I'm going to give you an example. You're going to be like, honestly, you're doing too much, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So I want you to think about if you are familiar with Acts 16 in the Bible, when it talks about Paul and Silas being in
mhm.
the jail, and that's the part where suddenly, the doors of the
Oh
jail
yeah.
were open. Okay, here is
Hmm.
the part that we miss. The jailer, whose only job that day was to protect them and keep them in there, was
Right.
thinking about suicide. The passage meant, I know, the passage meant, I want you to go back and read it. The passage mentions that he talked about falling on his own sword
Lord.
because he knew that would kind of be a merciful death compared to what his bosses
Mhm.
would
We're
do
gonna
to him.
do.
So I want you to think about that for a second. Nowhere in the scripture does it tell us that he had an issue with depression or he had a mental health condition. It doesn't say that. It
Mhm.
doesn't say anything about his life. It was supposed to be a normal day on the job. And then all of a sudden this thing happens.
And knowing
Less than five
what
minutes.
face,
Don't know.
less than 5 minutes.
When you are experiencing hopelessness, you might absolutely think about suicide. I love the fact that when I thought about suicide in 2021, that was not the first time I thought about it. That was the last time I thought about it. But I remember that year looking at data from the CDC. And in 2021, it said that there were, I think it was 12.3 million people who reported having thoughts of suicide. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, you just normalized it for me because I
Mhm.
thought I was by myself. And
Mm.
I think that's what we have to do more of. Have these conversations with people. Get ourselves to a place of safety where we can be vulnerable and share our experiences with people so that they can get connected to hope and help as well. Because it's there. It's
Right.
there.
What is the reasoning behind our community and our youth, I'm working on my words,
It's
attempting
okay.
suicide at a faster rate, that growing faster than other ethnic groups?
I think it depends on a lot of things. And I'm gonna tell you, this screen age generation is having a
Ooh,
hard
that's a good way to describe
time.
it. Screen
Yikes.
age.
Yikes. Because you're talking about, and I'm gonna get back to answering the question. You just talking about brains that are not even fully developed and just being all of the information that's downloaded in their brains throughout the day and them not having the ability to process through that information. I'm going to show you something, and it's not going to take long, but just thinking about that made me want to use my hand. And when I start doing this, I don't want you to think I'm doing sign language. I want you to know what I'm doing.
Okay.
So Dr. Dan Siegel has this model of the brain. It's called a hand brain model. Okay. This part of the brain is the emotional brain. Okay. This part is
Mhm.
the survival brain. It's connected to our amygdala, which is our appraisal system that tells us, whether or not something is a real or perceived threat. When you
Mhm.
fold your fingers over your thumb, this represents our cortex. So this is where our executive function is, where we're able to problem solve and make decisions and those types of things. So I want
Mhm.
you to think about a kid's brain that is not fully a human's brain for that. Because if you have a nervous system, we go through the same thing too. But think about if there is a highly charged emotional event
Mhm.
that their brains are reminded of, their autonomic nervous system that's right here is gonna do something. Fight, flight, freeze, submit, collapse is gonna do something. But whenever the threat reaches that part of the brain, it signals to the amygdala that there is a threat. Now, remember, I told you this is where our executive thinking is, the wise old owl.
Mhm.
If we're in survival brain and our amygdala says, hey, this is a threat, what's going to happen to our brain? It's going to go offline. We're not going to be able to make those rational decisions, resource those things that we're normally able to do when we're at a place of balance. And I want you to think about how difficult that is for us as adults,
Mhm.
how difficult it is for these children to process through that with these underdeveloped brains. And deal with those social drivers of hell, and deal with other things that may be going on internally or in their family relationship, all of those things. For North Carolina youth, what we've seen, not just our Black babies but across youth, what we've seen is that some of the reasons why are the things that I mentioned, but also that there was a recent crisis within the last 2 weeks. That could be
Mhm.
anything. That could be, maybe there was displacement from the home. Maybe there was a fight with a boyfriend, those types of things. And so, one of the things, another myth that I want to dispel is for some, and I guess it's just because that's what we've been taught, that people think that every person that dies by suicide has a mental health disorder, and that's
That's
not true.
not true.
It's not true.
Yeah.
And so again, that's why these conversations are so important, so we can dispel those myths, and just bring clarity and understanding to the importance of why we've got to have these compassionate
Mhm.
conversations.
Well, and speaking of, because I got off track, we were talking about myths. There's another, again, in one of the readings where I'm doing in talking about they attempted just wanting attention. That's
Mm,
another myth. When in actuality, we have to realize that that person is hurting.
absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes, and I guess, bless us. That's just a saying I say when I'm just, my brain is tired. Just bless us, bless us. That's why we've got to kind of do this deconstruction of the things that we have learned over the years and kind of reprogram ourselves, or just
Mhm.
have this reconstruction of our thoughts based on evidence-based and evidence-informed information. And
Mhm.
so there is not one precipitating factor that leads to a person thinking about suicide. Okay. I, I think sometimes people think that, but there isn't just one thing. Because if it was just that one thing,
Mhm.
research may have told us how to figure out which one thing it is, so that
Mhm.
we can continue to help people process through, what they're going through, and remain. But there isn't just the one thing. Um, I think there's several things, and we talked about these things tonight, that as a community, as a Black community, we have to do a whole lot better at having conversations about. One of the things, let me, and I hadn't shared this with you yet. So at 15, that was the first time I thought about suicide.
Mhm.
My parents, and I have permission to share their story. My mom was depressed. My dad was a substance user. Um, he was a person who was in addiction, and I was the oldest of 5 kids, and we were living in Miami, Florida. And it was interesting because I used to think that I would die before I turned 18 because there was so much community violence. And
Mhm.
so just trying to get through that, navigating through that as a kid was difficult. And then help my mom raise these babies when my dad was not at home. And I remember when I got pregnant at 15, I said, there's no way that I can bring this burden on this family.
Mm-hmm.
And we were experiencing homelessness at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, wow, there's no way I can tell her. I've got to figure out what to do. I tried to abort. Um, that didn't work. Thank God. Thank God it did not. Um, but I said, I can't bring this burden on my family. And I said to myself, and this is so interesting that at 15, I thought about this, LaRonda. I said, Black people don't kill themselves. So I thought.
That's kind of what we're taught.
Oh, yeah. So I'm like, well, Black people don't kill themselves. And if I kill myself, then my mama's going to resurrect me and kill me again. Because
that's what they were
saying.
I know.
I was like, girl, you better figure out how you're going to do this thing. And it took me some time, but I had to, I eventually talked to her about it. But one of the things that was so difficult, made it so difficult for me during that pregnancy, other than not wanting to be pregnant, was the fact that my faith community was not there. Not for me, but for my mom.
For your mom.
And that was devastating. They wanted me to come before the church and apologize for getting pregnant. My mom was, I was shamed. My family was shunned. My mother, we had to sit on the back row of the church, and I just thought, wow, like, this is crazy that a place that was supposed to be a place of healing, a safe haven for hurting people,
it was tearing you down.
Is my oppressor. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so, even then it's so interesting because even at that time, like, sometimes we're upset with God about why things happen. And I just don't recall at 15 saying, well, God, I just, I'm mad at you, which he would have honored it if I was. He allows us to be honest about the way we feel. But I never said that. But my issue was with people.
Yeah.
My issue was with church. Still got an issue with church people. I love them, Lord, but they just get on my nerves. and I say that with in all solidarity, and love. And I mean it. That's the thing. Because we have to do better about the way that we treat people. It does not matter if they don't believe the way we believe, if they don't look the way, none of that matters. It's still a soul that needs to be connected to hope and help. And I just say that unapologetically. It is what my pastor knows that. He knows that about me. Now I'm going to tell you, I love my pastor. I absolutely do. But I can't say that about everybody else's pastor. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've been in places and in ministries where people, Lord Jesus. Yeah, I won't say that, but I'll just say we've got to do better as a faith community. That's all I'm saying.
We do. Faith and then our community as well. Just as you were saying, listening to you and going back to in 21 when you said you were thinking about it then and no one would have known. It takes me to, you hear people say, check on your strong friends.
Yes.
Because whether you are catching signs or not, having transparent conversations to where your people know it's okay to talk about mental health. And so there's no stigma to it. You're not going to be
shamed. Right.
About
and you know what? The thing is, I can't say that I didn't have people that I could have talked to about it. I think for me, dealing with issues of perfection, and because that's the way I grew up, got to do this right, got to show up right, you got to do this, you got to do that. For me, that would have been outing myself that I'm not perfect and I don't have it all together. Because at this point, I should be doing ... When in all actuality, I was hurting and I didn't really want to die. I just wanted the pain that I felt to go away. That's most people that are thinking about suicide. because there is that ambivalence. A part of them can't, fully decide, haven't fully decided to die, but then at the same time, they can't fully commit to remaining. And so they're kind of at that crossroads, like, what do I do? Especially if there is a loss of hope and a loss of connection.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
understand it. And so I don't take anything away from those experiences that I had, because it helps me to sit and be present with people who are struggling.
Yeah.
Oh, it's my jam. And I don't have any boundaries when it comes to that. It's however long I need to sit until you're okay. I'm willing to remain because I want you to remain.
Mm. I've said this before. You are a blessing to those people that you connect with. You really are. And the work that you are doing at DHHS with COPE and the other, circles that you are in, it is a blessing. I do want to ask you, you said, when people reach out to you, you are there. I'm there with you until you are okay. If someone is feeling here that you were just mentioning, I have the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline there. Call 988, not 911.
Right.
988. But getting help, what are your recommendations, or what would you say to them?
So this is what I would say, because that answer. Let me give you the Isley answer. I think it depends on the individual. We always want to give out 988. We even would say that while there is a difference between 911 and 988, and there is some information that SAMHSA put out earlier this month about the difference between the two, or at the end of April. That is brilliant. I would recommend that people go out there and find that information in the Partner Toolkit. Even if they hit 911, there really is no wrong door. Those calls will be rerouted to the place where they need to go. The good thing about that is that 911 is connected to, across our state, several mobile crisis, centers or crisis intervention teams. And so that's why I say it really is no wrong door, although 988 is the preferred number. I also say, as a resource, you always have to find out what are those things that are helpful and protective for people. Because it could be that a person may not be willing to contact a therapist, but they may be willing to contact their pastor. And so we have to uplift both those informal and formal supports as well. But definitely 988. There are some resources out there that folks can Google if they'd like. There's therapy for Black men, therapy for Black girls. There is a Call Black line that people can utilize as well if they're looking for those culturally relevant and sensitive resources. But your family, your friends, again, those relationships that are helpful and protective, those things can be just as invaluable as calling that 988 number.
I do want to give your information because I see we're getting close to time. Man, time flies.
Yeah.
So I'm putting Isley's information up because she actually, correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of does various trainings, workshops, things of that nature. Like she said, when she's welcomed into your county, into your place of worship, your entity, she comes in to share this knowledge. So here is her email address to get in touch with her for more information. Because you just mentioned it's an assist training. Did I get that right?
Yes.
So one example.
So the Living Works Education Platform has several trainings in their trainer cadre, but the assist training is the most robust out of all of the trainings. And it's a 2-day training, and it talks about how to recognize signs and symptoms of suicide and how to connect people to help. I love it. It's amazing. It's a heavy lift, but that's one that I do. I also provide youth mental health first aid trainings. I don't even want to get started with the list of trainings I do, LaRonda. Social for Black churches training. I provide the counseling on access to lethal means training. I'm going to get trained to provide Let's Save Lives, which is and AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, developed training that is specific to Black and African American communities. And so if it's out there to be done, I will do it. My brain doesn't like it because it's like, oh man, what are we doing today? This training, which whatever. But truly, when I say that I am here to bring hope and help to our community, that is absolutely what I mean.
How do you, and I hope you don't mind me asking, and if you don't want to answer, you just say now.
Oh, I'll answer.
With you hearing about the 9-year-old being so connected to it as you are, how do you take care of yourself? Because that could be a lesson for me and whomever listens on dealing with things too. How do you take care of yourself?
Well, let me be honest. That's a struggle for me because I'm so busy doing other stuff for other people that I don't take care of myself. And that's kind of the way it is in the helping profession. Like, oh, you want to make sure that everybody else is well, but you don't do well at taking care of yourself. What I try to do, if it's only 5 minutes a day, wait a minute, let me back up. First of all, I have a therapist. Jesus and a therapist is the best connection I've ever had. Okay, and let me just say that. Okay?
You, as we say, you ain't never lied. That's true.
So that helps. But it also helps for me because I'm doing so much. If I have a span of just 5 or 10 minutes, if I can just sit outside, get some vitamin D. If I can force myself to eat, that's restorative. If I can, like I was telling you earlier, if I can not block time out on my day and have time to take a lunch break where I can get a power nap.
Yeah.
Try to get it in, those are things for me. I'm not one where, I'm going to pretend like I have it all together. I ain't never had it all together. And I'm not one that pretends. I think you create so much harm and distrust when you do that versus just being straight up and saying, I suck at self-care, but I try to work on it every day. And so that's just my real answer. Like, those are the things that I do. Some days are better than others. Some days it may just be if I can get in the bed at 10 o'clock instead of 1 o'clock. Yeah. It looks differently on different days.
Yes. I know lifting up the therapist, because people, there is nothing wrong with having a therapist. The way I look at it is, though, what you can't tell your friends and your family, you don't have to hold anything back. You just
sure don't.
Put it out there.
For me, I think having a therapist is so beneficial for me because I have so many things going on that I don't not that I don't necessarily share with people, but I don't have to have fear of judgment. I don't have to have fear of ridicule.
Yeah.
This is truly, you can be your authentic self. You don't have to put on, you don't have to pretend. This is just me. This is who I am. And I feel accepted. I feel respected. I feel appreciated. And I'm just grateful for my therapist. I'm telling you.
Well, Asley, thank you so much. Before we walk away, I don't know if there's any one or couple of things that you want to share, but I can't thank you enough for this conversation and all that you were doing.
You're so welcome. I'm so grateful for you. Yeah, I would just say, just hold on. If I had to just leave a couple, just hold on. The struggle, yeah, it's real. It's here. But there are so many of us out here who love and support you. If you're struggling today, there's so many of us who truly care. And so connect with your people. For me, my people are in community. My people are, having this conversation with you. This is my jam. This is restorative. And so I just, want to encourage people, find your people, use your people, and take care of yourself, whatever that looks like for you. If it's axe throwing, I declare I'm gonna start. I want to do it so bad. If it's axe throwing,
you gotta try it.
Girl, it was amazing.
Or a smash room. Ooh,
that's what I heard. Because look, sometimes I don't know if I can. I probably don't need to say that, but I'll pretend like I'm doing it. I feel like I'm Florida Evans sometimes.
I know.
Say it that way. Because life hits you with some stuff that
It does.
you're not prepared to handle.
No.
And you gotta sense into what you're feeling, be present with it, and then utilize those resources, those things that you use to cope, that provide strength and help and support during those times of struggle. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much once again. And I guess I will see you next month.
Okay. Have a good one. Thank you so much. God bless you.
You too. Thank you.
You.